Whether reason will prevail depends only partly upon us. We must hope and strive for the best. We must prepare for the worst.
No, so first of all, thanks, guys. This is great. It's great to sort of have. I'm a big fan of long form conversations. I think it's sort of the wave of the future. It also allows guests to get their ideas out fully. So, George, I think you're hitting on something very important, and it just so happens, right, not coincidentally, I would imagine, that this is the subject of my new book. I co-authored it with American Foreign Policy Council President Herman Kirchner, and it's called The New Imperialists, right? And it's about precisely that. So the first data point, sort of where I think the book breaks new ground, is everybody's trying to figure out how to rack and stack this ominous convergence that we're seeing between the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians, and other actors too, right? North Korea, potentially Venezuela. But they all call it different things, right? It can be an axis of aggressors, an axis of upheaval, but they don't talk a lot about the dynamics, right? And our contention in the book, The New Imperialist, is precisely that. It is the Brzezinski frame that you articulated, which is that this is all China, Russia, and Iran are the three legs of the stool, and they're being driven by imperialist impulses. In fact, if you look geographically, sort of you work your way around the clock phase, everywhere that China touches, they have territorial disputes with. Virtually everywhere that Russia touches, they have territorial disputes with. And even Iran, even though it's in a comparatively weak strategic position, they also have imperial aspirations over the Strait of Hormuz, over Bahrain and other places. And so I think that's a great common through line to highlight, because not a lot of people talk about it. And the second feature of this, which is what makes the challenge so complex, is that these imperial impulses are complementary. What China does in the Indo-Pacific doesn't cause Iran's ayatollahs to stay up at night. And what Iran does in the Strait of Hormuz actually rebounds to the benefits of Putin and his inner circle in Moscow for a whole host of reasons, right? So there may be flashpoints, right? The Russian Far East is a flashpoint between Russia and China. Central Asia is a flashpoint between all three countries. But that's in the future. That's not right now. Right now, you're seeing convergence built around this shared cooperation, this shared revisionist attempt to sort of rewrite the world order and put the United States and Europe on the back foot. And it's succeeding precisely because there's this common through line of imperialism, and there's a lot of commonality right now. There's not a lot of contradiction, at least not yet. Well, it's interesting because it's all sort of self-identity and self-conception, right? So in the context of Ukraine, right, with George, which you've worked a lot on, there is a tremendous amount of Russian. Here, let me start that. So I think it's a great question, right? And I think it goes to the heart of identity, strategic culture, and sort of self-conception. Russians would never be able to convince other global peoples that their economy is in good shape, that they're really selling a vision, a construct of societal organization that other countries should sort of adhere to. But what Putin has sold very successfully to his people is that we're a distinct civilization, we're destined for greatness. So I think the answer derives from identity and sort of self-conception, and it bleeds over into strategic culture, right? Because Vladimir Putin could never sell other publics, global publics, on the fact that the Russian model is a winning model, that there is a real sort of, there's so much economic dynamism, there's so much societal pluralism, this is really what you want to follow. What he does do, and what he has done successfully with his own people, is he's managed to convince them, hey, we're a distinct civilization, we're destined, right, by nature of, sorry, this is ambient, by nature of, by our sort of historical culture, because, the Russian Empire stretches back almost a millennia, we are destined for greatness, right? There's no other choice but to be an empire. And this this creates the frame for Russian predation in Ukraine, but also elsewhere. And, what's very telling to me is the degree to which, I sort of spent a lot of time in Central and Eastern Europe. I just got back from a trip to the Baltics. And it was really striking to me to the degree to which government officials there and analysts there are in violent agreement that whatever starts in Ukraine doesn't end in Ukraine, right? And I think that's really lost on policymakers here in Washington, because the idea, there's this old Russian saw that the appetite comes with the eating. And if you have an imperial frame, if you believe that you are destined to control these territories anyway, it makes total sense. And then when you rack and stack the fact that there seems to be flagging American enthusiasm for support for Ukraine, the Europeans may be saying the right things, but they haven't marshaled the resources to really build the infrastructure to bring military equipment from the west of the continent to the east of the continent. These are all emboldening factors if you are already thinking in an imperial way. I think it's interesting. The way if you recall the misconceptions that led preliminarily to this war, Vladimir Putin was saying things like, "Oh, well, they're going to welcome us with open arms. The war's going to take 3 days. It's going to be a cakewalk. It's going to be great." Part of that is, I think, imperial hubris. Part of that is also a very natural phenomenon. He is not a humanitarian, and I've never heard of anyone getting promoted because they told Vladimir Putin something he didn't want to hear. So it creates this authoritarian echo chamber in terms of decision making that really skews decisions. And we see this in the context, for example, in the context of Iran, right? Right up until the 12-day war of June 2025, the Iranians were in response to what was charitably feckless U.S. Middle East policy under the Biden administration. The Iranians felt emboldened to really throw their weight around in asymmetric ways, right? Through proxies, through influencing neighboring governments like the government of Iraq. I think it led them to overestimate their staying power in a conventional military conflict. And by the way, the authoritarian nature of these countries exerts an intellectual pull. So just in recent days, we've seen the Iranian Supreme Leader, who apparently, even though he is 87, he is super active on social media. I think his Twitter game needs some work, frankly, but he was evangelizing on social media that Iran actually won the 12-day war. Iran handed a defeat to Israel and the United States, right? And so on one level, this is totally understandable. They got their clocks clean. They have to sort of save face a little bit. But on the other hand, I really do wonder how much he really knows the extent of the damage that was inflicted upon Iranian infrastructure by the Israelis and by the United States, because there's a vested interest in that bureaucracy not to tell him this whole story.